Hey there, interwebs, and welcome back to How Fascinating, where Hot Barbarian Summer continues. In case you're not following me on Twitter, and if not, why not, hashtag Hot Barbarian Summer is my ongoing attempt to write 4 heroic fantasy stories in as many months, or at least the first drafts thereof. Today's video isn't one of them, obviously, but since I'm already in a barbaric mood, we may as well examine the topic. So, who were the barbarians? Well, the answer depends on whom you ask. According to the Hellenic Greeks who first coined the term, it referred to, well, everyone but them. The Egyptians, the Persians, the Phoenicians, and anyone else who wasn't from a Grecophone city-state. This especially included their northerly neighbors, the Macedonians, the Scythians, and the Cimmerians. Every Howard fan in the audience just pricked their ears up. The reason I say Grecophone, as opposed to Greek or Grecian, is due to the amusing etymology of the word. According to the ancient Greek writers, you know the ones, any language other than proper Greek sounded to their ears like bar, and hence the people who spoke it were barbarians. Think of it like the Greek version of Swedish chefs bork, or various East Asian caricatures I'm not going to reenact here. Of course, the Greeks weren't the only people to use the term. In their perpetual attempt to recreate their Achaean role models, the Romans adopted and adapted the epithet to refer to various tribes, including the Celts, Iberians, and Thracians, and especially the Gallic and Germanic tribes to their north. Even the ancient Chinese had a similar concept, and predictably, their definition of barbarian was anyone who wasn't Chinese. This dichotomy is also known as the Sino-Barbarian dichotomy, or the Hua-Yi distinction. Perhaps the most famous Yi representative is Bodhidharma, the founder of Chan Buddhism in China, where he is also known as the Blue-Eyed Barbarian, and again, the Howard fans all just pricked their ears up. China's most infamous barbarians, however, were almost certainly their northern nemesis, the Mongols. India has its own term for barbarian outsiders, mleccha, and because this Sanskrit term has no known Indo-European etymology, it is taken to mean speaking indistinctly, just like how barbarian is derived from bar. Also, given India's position relative to the rest of the continent, mleccha is practically a synonym for northerner. From the late 8th to mid-11th century, Western Europe was terrorized by some of the most fearsome, and now popular, barbarians history has ever known. The Vikings! Or Norsemen if you want to be more correct. Interestingly, the Vikings had their own equivalent of barbarians called Skrælingjar, referring to the Proto-Inuit peoples of Greenland and the Canadian Arctic archipelago, which is about as north gets. Skræling's modern Icelandic descendant, Skrælingi, is used to mean barbarian, but the Danish descendant Skræling means weakling. Ultimately, the appellation most likely comes from the Old Norse word skra, meaning dried skin, and probably refers to the animal pelts worn by local populations. The idea of barbarian warriors getting named after the pelts they wear also applies to the Norsemen themselves, specifically the berserkers. Although the terms barbarian and berserker are sometimes used interchangeably, looking at you, Dungeons & Dragons, the word berserker actually means bear shirt in Old Norse. That being said, the word bear doesn't actually mean bear. Well, okay, it does now, but it didn't start out that way. Bear with me for a moment. Do you know what indigenous North Americans, Celts, Finns, and Ainu people of northern Japan all had in common? If you said arctolatry, or bear worship, good guess because you're right. As a matter of fact, just about any place where bears can be found has also known at least one culture which revered the creatures at some point in its history. Some scholars even speculate that Neanderthals of the Paleolithic era revered the cave bear, although that hypothesis is now considered dubious. That puts the bear on the same deific playing field as big concepts like fertility, the sun, and death. Now that is power. Perhaps now you see why, back in the days of yore, the bear was considered so powerful and fearsome that no one dared to speak its true name, lest they unintentionally summon it Beetlejuice style. As an alternative, euphemistic titles or kennings were often employed instead, including the Proto-Germanic word bero, functionally meaning the brown one. Based on reconstructed Indo-European, the real word should probably be something like Yeah, in my household, it is established lore that we do not speak the true name of the bear. As a result of this terminological taboo, many of Proto-Germanic's linguistic descendants refer to the creature with similar words, such as the English bear, or slightly archaic bruin, the German bear, and the Icelandic beorn, which is close to the Old English beorn. Yes, like the character from The Hobbit. Old English also employed the kenning Beowulf, literally meaning bee-wolf, although in this case wolf is a poetic way of saying hunter, due to the bear's well-documented love of honey. The name game doesn't stop at bear, either. These creatures are a perfect example of what happens when zoological kennings take a turn on the euphemism treadmill. Similar to the Old English bee hunter is the Slavic word medved, meaning honey eater, which itself replaced a word akin to bear, preserved in words like berloga, literally bear's lair, referring to a den. This means that the Slavs went from the bear's true name to bear to honey eater, which is now giving way to terms like the furry one. You could also call bears by their scientific names, but there are currently 8 extant species of bear spread across 5 genera in 3 separate subfamilies. Even limiting yourself to the Ursus genus, or true bears, only narrows it down by half, and which of the 4 species, polar bears, brown bears, and American and Asiatic black bears, do you think the designation Ursus arctos belongs to? The obvious answer is the polar bear, being the bear whose range most overlaps with the Arctic, but that's wrong. Polar bear's binomial designation is Ursus maritimus, referring to their swimming ability, and Ursus arctos refers to the brown bear. This name is actually a mixture of Latin and Greek, meaning bear, and thinking about it, their English name brown bear just means brown. The truth is that the Arctic is actually named after a bear, rather than vice versa. Its namesake is Ursa Major, the Great Bear constellation which contains the Big Dipper, but don't think for a moment that the global north is wanting for bears in the flesh, either. The Arctic is home to polar bears, and North America and Eurasia are both home to brown bears, as well as American and Asiatic black bears, respectively, with the latter also containing sun bears, sloth bears, and of course giant panda bears. Until 1870, the now extinct Atlas bear lived in North Africa. Traveling further south, we encounter fewer bears. The Andean spectacled bear is the only bear species native to South America, and there are no bears in mainland Australia, apart from imposter koala bears and ferocious drop bears, a clear and present danger. Depending on where you draw the line between Southeast Asia and Oceania, however, the latter may contain sun bears. This means that of the 4 major continental regions, Afro-Eurasia, Oceania, Antarctica, and the Americas, the only one to not have any bears is Antarctica, whose name literally means no bear's place. Of course, this isn't due to its absence of native ursine fauna, it's just called that because it's opposite the Arctic. Regardless, no member of the Ursus genus lives south of the equator, and no bears at all live in Antarctica. Suffice to say, north means bears, and bears mean north. The girl's name Barbara, and by extension Barbarella, means foreign, exotic, or stranger, and unsurprisingly, it shares a linguistic root with barbarian. Given that the historical groups most associated with the word these days are the peoples of what is now Germany, no doubt due to the Romans and their influence on Western civilization, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that the King of Germany and later Holy Roman Emperor Barba-rossa also took his name from the Appalachian. It's reasonable, but it's wrong. Barba-rossa actually means red beard, as barba is the word for beard in both Latin and Italian. It's no coincidence that a barber is someone who trims people's beards. There's also a Latin expression, barba tenus sapientes, which means as wise as far as his beard, and implies that the person in question only looks intelligent. A related phrase is barba non facit philosophum, or the beard does not make a philosopher. I modified this to create the pun barba non facit barbarum, or the beard does not make a barbarian, because many people, myself included, associate the two. They're just 2 things that go well together, like blackjack and hookers, or pineapple and pizza. You could also say the beard does not make the bear, but it certainly helps. Obviously, you're less likely to find a beard on a lady barbarian, Vilga Fortis notwithstanding, but an NPC in the setting of my homebrew D&D campaign is a red-headed dwarf barbarian called Barbarina, meaning little bearded one, and named after her father, Barba-rossa. I named him, in turn, after the real-life Barba-rossa, not the Holy Roman Emperor, but the 16th century Ottoman corsair. He was given this Italian nom de guerre for his full red beard while he operated, completely coincidentally, off the Barbary coast. If you don't know where that is, it's once again in the north, albeit northern Africa rather than northern Europe. The toponym is derived from the native Berber peoples, but this ethnonym was not self-applied. The Amazighan people of the Maghreb acquired the title of Berber via Arabic as a variation of that same Greek word barbaros. Also, your word of the day is ethnonym. On this 17th century Dutch map, you can see that the region is even titled Barbaria. And what about Barbados? Is this also a land of barbarians from its colonizers' point of view? Is Barbadian barbarian redundant? Surprisingly not. The name Barbados actually comes from either the Spanish or Portuguese word for bearded, as does barbuda. It seems that if a name begins with barba, it's probably related to beards, but if it starts with barbar, with a second R, it's related to barbarians. The exception is Barba-rossa, because its second R is actually attached to the front of rossa, not the back of barba. Let us return now to the Arctic. As an adjective, it can relate to bears, but it also means north, as does the word boreal. Boreal, however, is etymologically unrelated to bears, beards, or babbling barbarians. Instead, it comes from Boreas, the deific personification of the frigid north wind and bringer of winter in classical mythology, and from it we have derived terms like aurora borealis and boreal forest. The latter is unrelated to the adjective arboreal, also relating to forests. Moving beyond boreal, we come to Hyperborea. That's literally what it means, the land beyond north, or, more accurately, the land north of the legendary cave of Boreas. Homer, followed by Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Callimachus, placed Boreas in Thrace, which would most likely set Hyperborea somewhere in the Balkans or the Slavic states, but over the years speculations about this legendary location's true identity have ranged all the way from what is now modern-day Bulgaria to Fennoscandia to the Arctic Circle. In the 4th century BC, the ancient Greek historian and geographer Hecataeus of Abdera declared it to be the British Isles. In case any of the aforementioned Conan fans in the audience were wondering, yes, this is where Howard got the name for his Hyborian age. Despite the audible similarity and shared connection to the British Isles, however, Hyperborea/Hyborea shouldn't be confused with Hibernia, a classical Latin name for Ireland. This toponym began as Eriu, the Irish Celts' name for their homeland, which the ancient Greeks such as Pythias of Massalia localized as Ierne. The Romans later combined this with their word for wintry, Hibernus, creating Hibernia, a theoretical far northern land of winter. Hibernus is also where we get the verb hibernate, and if you asked people to name an animal that hibernates, I bet that most of them would give the bear as their first answer. With that, we seem to have come full Arctic Circle, so I'll wrap this video up with the same topic I used to introduce it: Hot Barbarian Summer. As I mentioned at the beginning, I am attempting to write 4 heroic fantasy stories in as many months, and the hero of this month's story is a wandering barbarian adventurer. His name is Barbor, which he claims means Bear of the North, but his partner, a southern priestess, says that it just sounds like gibberish to her. Thanks for watching, and have a fascinating day. The toponym Hibernia also bears a superficial similarity to Hyrcania, which, in addition to also being a nation from Howard's Hyborian age, was a historical region in what is now Iran and Turkmenistan. Hyrcania came into Greek from the Old Persian name Verkana, which means wolfland, and in a remarkable instance of serendipity, wolfland was also a once common English name for Ireland due to the Emerald Isle's comparatively large and unchecked lupine population. Wolves were deliberately extirpated from England sometime around the turn of the 16th century. The Irish themselves referred to wolves with the kenning Mactire, meaning son of the land, to avoid accidentally summoning the beasts by speaking their true name. A similar practice can be seen in Sweden, where the archaic word ulv has been entirely supplanted by the kenning varg, meaning killer, slayer, or strangler. And yes, this is where Tolkien got the word warg. The Latin phrase lupus in fabula literally means the wolf in the story, but fills the same lexical niche as the English expression speak of the devil, id est, don't speak its name, lest it appear. Do we as modern people really have to worry about summoning wolves and bears, though? Well, given that a bear showed up at my apartment complex in Philly a few years ago, I'm going to say that you can never be too careful. Whether it's bears, beards, or barbarians, these 3 hyperboreal hallmarks can all agree on one thing: brr. So maybe hot barbarian summer ain't so hot after all.